Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Chapter 51. On the drive to school, Sebastian hadn't said a word, leaving Danny quietly hoping that his friend might feel better as the day went on. But when they walked into the cafeteria with Jenna following behind, Sebastian looked even worse than that morning, which made Danny even more concerned. His friend appeared pale and exhausted, as if all his energy had been drained. Jenna caught Danny's eye and, with a mixture of frustration and worry, silently gestured toward Sebastian. Sebastian sat across from Danny, keeping his gaze fixed on the tray of food he had brought to the table. Jenna perched beside him, fidgeting with her fingers as her eyes shifted between the two boys. She hadn't heard much from Sebastian all morning except a quiet hello in their first period class. Danny shrugged lightly in her direction and began eating, but subtly nudged Sebastian with his foot, a small gesture to show he didn't have to be alone. Sebastian glanced up briefly, then returned to his food, avoiding eye contact. When lunch ended, the three of them rose from the table. Jenna hesitated for a moment, glancing at Danny before announcing that she was heading to her next class. She walked down the hallway in the opposite direction of Sebastian's classroom. Since it was his free period, Danny decided to walk Sebastian to class. As they made their way through the crowded hallway, Danny felt the rough edge of a fabric brush against his arm. Looking down, he noticed a bandage wrapped around Sebastian's hand and wrist. "Hey, what happened to your arm?" Danny asked softly, leaning closer. Sebastian remained silent for a moment, and Danny feared he might not answer. "I hurt it while volunteering in the junior gym class," Sebastian said finally, his gaze fixed straight ahead as they continued down the hallway. Danny suspected it wasn't the full truth, but he didn't push, quietly walking him to his classroom before heading to the library. Danny found a computer tucked away in a quiet corner, far from the usual bustle. He glanced around to make sure he was alone, then logged in. Typing the article's title into the search bar, he quickly found the piece, but frustration grew as he realized there wasn't much information. All it mentioned was a 45-year-old man being released on a technicality. Scrolling to the bottom of the page, Danny searched for related articles. Several appeared, and he flipped through them, watching the timeline of events unfold. Each article gave more context, but he still didn't know exactly who was involved, or why Sebastian seemed so affected. Finally, Danny discovered the original article, nearly a year old. Its headline left him speechless: "Star teen basketball player kidnapped and harmed by family friend." As Danny read, a chill ran through him. The more he learned, the more he understood why Sebastian carried such a heavy weight, and why the brightness in his eyes had dimmed. Chapter 52. With the images from the articles still fresh in his mind, Danny was unusually quiet on the ride back to Sebastian's house, answering Philip's questions only with short responses. Now that he knew more about what had happened in Sebastian's hometown, he was astounded at how well Sebastian had been holding up. If it had been him, he knew he wouldn't have lasted nearly as long or held on to hope for rescue. How had Sebastian managed to keep going without completely losing himself? Danny wanted to ask Sebastian about what had happened, about how he felt, and to let him know he accepted it. But the truth was, he didn't quite know how to feel. Sebastian had been both right and wrong for not telling him the whole story. Danny felt both relief and anger now that he had a clearer picture, well, the newspaper's version anyway, which might have been far from the full truth. He knew he had to talk to Sebastian, and there was no easy way to do it. But he couldn't let Sebastian stay in the dark alone any longer. He didn't know exactly what Sebastian had gone through, but he knew what it felt like to feel utterly alone. He just had to get Sebastian alone for a bit. "Hey, do you maybe want to try those exercises again?" Danny asked as he joined Sebastian at the front of the car, Philip racing ahead of them to the front door. I don't know if that's such a good idea," Sebastian replied, rubbing the back of his neck and avoiding Danny's gaze as he let Philip into the house. Danny jogged to catch up, and all three of them entered the large, quiet house. "It won't be anything like last time, I promise," Danny said, forcing a reassuring smile despite the nervous tension bubbling under his skin. Then we can just talk afterwards. Yeah, alright, we can try that, Sebastian agreed, heading to the kitchen to grab Philip a quick snack before he went upstairs to do his schoolwork. He reached for a box of granola bars, letting Philip pick one before putting the box back on the shelf. After a hug from Philip, Danny motioned for Sebastian to start heading upstairs as well. Sebastian hesitated in the doorway, exhaling slowly before finally walking to his room, Danny following closely behind. Once inside, Danny closed the door and leaned his head against it, stealing a glance at Sebastian. From his spot on the bed, Sebastian was watching him, suspicious of Danny's intentions. Danny leaned back against the door and met Sebastian's gaze. Immediately, Sebastian's heart skipped a beat. "What happened back in your hometown?" Danny asked, his eyes locked on Sebastian, silently urging him to speak. "What do you mean?" Sebastian asked, lowering his gaze to his lap, his hands shaking slightly as he clasped them together. Danny narrowed his eyes and moved halfway across the room, planting his hands on his hips. "Sebastian wasn't going to make this easy, was he?" "The fact that you were kidnapped and held against your will," Danny said, his voice firm but controlled. "Did you really think I would never find out?" Sebastian's head snapped up, his eyes wide and horrified. His mind raced. He hadn't wanted Danny to know. He hadn't wanted pity, or for Danny to see him differently. And now Danny knew. Sebastian's body began to shake. His shoulders hunched, his breathing became uneven, and he curled forward slightly, trying to contain himself. Tears began to fall, but slowly, Danny moved to kneel in front of him. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to," Danny whispered, unsure of what to do. He hesitated, afraid to touch him, but he couldn't just stand by. Carefully, he wrapped Sebastian in a hug, holding him tight and murmuring, "You're going to be okay." Sebastian froze for a moment, his face buried against Danny's chest. Gradually, his breathing steadied, and he drew comfort from the familiar presence. Clinging to Danny's shirt, he let out quiet sniffles, feeling slightly safer. "I didn't want you to find out," Sebastian admitted softly, voice muffled. "Because I really like you, and I didn't want you to think differently of me. I'm ashamed of what happened, even though it wasn't my fault." Danny gently pulled back, cupping Sebastian's face in his hands. He wiped away a few stray tears and held his gaze. "You weren't at fault," Danny said softly. "This wasn't your doing. None of it. You didn't deserve any of it." Sebastian placed his hands over Danny's, resting his forehead against them. Danny's eyes caught faint marks along Sebastian's arm, reminders of past pain. "Please, let me help you," Danny urged, concern flooding his voice. But Sebastian clung to him, whispering, "I can't, please don't tell anyone." Danny's heart ached. He couldn't just ignore this, but he also didn't want to hurt Sebastian further. He steadied himself, looking down at him. "Tell me why," Danny said quietly. Sebastian, still holding on to him, whispered back, "Okay." His voice trembled, and small tears slipped from the corners of his eyes as he began to share, finally trusting Danny enough to let him in. Chapter 53. Sebastian guided Danny back toward the bed so they could both sit, giving himself a moment to gather his thoughts. Nearly 2 years of chaos and confusion had left him unsure where to even begin. Danny sat cross-legged on one side, facing him, while Sebastian settled the same way on the other, pillows behind him. "I'm not really sure where to start," Sebastian began, wiping at his cheeks to clear the lingering tears. Danny mirrored the motion, quietly wiping his own eyes. "The earliest I can remember clearly is the night after the championship game. My teammates and I decided to throw a party to celebrate." Sebastian paused, taking a shaky breath. "Everyone was drinking that night, including me and my best friend, Julian. I'd liked him for a long time, but back home, people weren't exactly accepting of anything different. That night, though, I had a little too much to drink, and so did Julian and I. I kissed him. After that, I left the party and, well, I accidentally came out to my parents later that night, but I don't really remember that part." Danny listened closely, sensing the weight of every word. "Someone at the party took pictures," Sebastian continued, his voice tight, "and the photos spread around the school. I was bullied after that. My locker was vandalized, I got hate notes, and there was verbal bullying, even some physical stuff. Danny's heart sank as he pictured it, his hands tightening slightly in his lap. I felt hopeless, so I went out drinking again, Sebastian said quietly, staring down at his hands. I don't fully remember what happened next. I just remember waking up somewhere dark, alone, and scared. Danny swallowed, unsure of what to say. It sounded surreal, almost like a story from a crime novel, yet Sebastian's trembling presence made it painfully real. I didn't know where I was at first, Sebastian whispered, but eventually someone came, someone angry over what happened at the party. I was trapped for months, and every day was a struggle. I can't even begin to explain all of it. His voice broke again, and tears spilled down his cheeks. Danny stayed quiet, leaning closer to offer silent support. He didn't want to interrupt or cause Sebastian to shut down. His name was Mr. Roberts, Sebastian continued shakily. It hurt me in ways I can't fully explain. Sometimes he wouldn't give me enough to eat, sometimes he would make me sick on purpose. He would yell at me, sometimes I wondered how I didn't give up. Danny's stomach churned as he listened. He had read the articles, but they hadn't even come close to revealing the truth. What Sebastian was telling him was worse than he could have imagined. Sebastian paused, trying to regain control. The worst part was the feeling of complete helplessness. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing quietly. Danny reached out, but only placed a hand gently near Sebastian's shoulder. It's okay, he murmured softly. You're safe now. After a few moments, Sebastian's tears slowed. He took a shaky breath. I don't know how anyone found me, but eventually I was rescued. I felt so happy to see the sunlight again. My family moved me away from that town after that because I wasn't doing well staying there. I wondered for a long time who had shared those photos. It turned out my ex-girlfriend had posted them, trying to get me back. She was possessive. Danny nodded, trying to remain calm despite the anger and sadness swirling inside him. Is that who was messaging you? Sebastian nodded, looking small and defeated. Danny clenched his hands in his lap, trying to focus on being there for him. And Julian? Danny asked quietly, feeling a pang of jealousy he immediately regretted. Sebastian's lips curved into a tiny, bittersweet smile. My parents sent him to a private school far away, Sebastian said softly, meeting Danny's gaze. I don't think he even knew what was happening back home. Danny reached over, just brushing his hand lightly against Sebastian's, letting the silent connection convey his support. They sat there together, both trying to process the past, but comforted by the fact that they weren't alone anymore. Chapter 54. Danny remained seated on the bed across from Sebastian, completely still. He didn't know what to say or how to react after everything he had just heard. His thoughts felt scattered, overwhelming. But above all else, one urgent feeling took over. He needed to get to the bathroom now. Without a word, Danny jumped to his feet and rushed into Sebastian's bathroom before Sebastian could stop him. He barely made it to the toilet before getting sick. Moments later, he sensed someone behind him. A gentle hand moved in slow circles on his back, steady and comforting, grounding him enough to breathe again. When it finally passed, Sebastian handed him a cool, damp cloth and quietly flushed the toilet. Danny wiped his mouth, then rested the cloth against the back of his neck as Sebastian offered him a glass of water. Danny leaned back against the toilet, exhausted. Sorry about that, Danny said quietly after a sip. I just wasn't expecting all of that. Sebastian was crouched in front of him, eyes red and glassy. Danny reached out and gently wiped away a tear slipping down Sebastian's cheek. Can I see them again? Danny asked softly. Sebastian swallowed. See what? The marks on your arm, Danny replied, his gaze drifting to Sebastian's wrist. Sebastian hesitated, instinctively pulling his arm closer to himself. But after everything he had already shared, resisting felt pointless. Slowly, he extended his arm, sleeve still covering most of it. Danny carefully pushed the sleeve up just enough to see. His chest tightened at the sight, faded scars, newer healing lines, all overlapping in quiet proof of pain Sebastian had carried alone. Danny didn't say anything. He simply traced a careful finger near the older marks, stopping before reaching anything that looked sensitive. After a moment, Danny gently set Sebastian's arm down and stood, opening the cabinet beneath the sink. He searched until he found a small first aid kit tucked toward the back. Taking it out, he knelt again beside Sebastian and held out his hand. Sebastian hesitated, then placed his arm into Danny's open palm. Danny worked carefully, cleaning and rewrapping the areas that needed attention, moving slowly and deliberately. "I know this might sting a little," Danny said quietly, "but I just want to make sure you're okay." Sebastian nodded, jaw tight but trusting him enough to stay still. When Danny finished, he secured the wrap and finally looked Sebastian in the eyes. "Now," Danny said gently but firmly, "where is it?" Sebastian frowned. "Where's what?" "The blade," Danny said plainly. "I need to know." Sebastian exhaled, then stood and stepped back into his room. After a moment of quiet rummaging, he returned and knelt in front of Danny, opening his hand. A small razor rested in his palm. Danny stared at it for a second, then closed his fingers around it. "Is this the only one?" he asked. Sebastian nodded, shame flickering across his face. Danny stood, walked to the toilet, and dropped the blade in. He flushed without hesitation, watching it disappear. When he turned back, he met Sebastian's eyes. "You don't have to face this alone anymore," Danny said softly. Sebastian didn't respond with words. Instead, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against Danny's chest, quietly accepting the promise. Chapter 55. The next morning, Sebastian woke to find Danny curled up against his chest, still asleep, one hand lightly gripping Sebastian's shirt. How had things come to this? Sebastian couldn't remember much from the night before. The details were hazy, but seeing Danny resting peacefully in his arms made him feel an unfamiliar sense of calm. Danny stirred, pressing his face closer to Sebastian's chest, lips quirking into a small, sleepy smile. Sebastian's mind wandered for a moment, thinking about how Danny had handled everything from the night before. Despite everything, Danny had remained composed, caring, and determined. Sebastian felt a strange mixture of gratitude and selfishness. He wanted Danny to be here, only with him, a comfort he had rarely allowed himself to feel. Gently, Sebastian ran his fingers through Danny's hair. Danny squirmed slightly before settling back down. Sebastian leaned down and placed a soft kiss on Danny's forehead, watching the tiny crease of his brow smooth out. A sudden thought made him glance toward the door. Did his parents know Danny had been sleeping in his room? Probably not, at least not fully. Even if they had noticed, they might not have guessed how important Danny had become to him. For the first time in a long while, Sebastian felt like he had someone he could truly rely on without judgment. "What, no good morning kiss?" Danny murmured groggily, stretching so he could look at Sebastian, one cheek still pressed against the pillow. Sebastian paused, then leaned down, pressing his lips softly to Danny's. Danny blinked in surprise, still half asleep, but didn't pull away. It was a small, quiet moment that carried more weight than words could convey. "Morning," Sebastian said softly when he pulled back slightly, a small smile forming. Danny's face flushed, and he rested his forehead against Sebastian's chest, trying to hide the warmth spreading through him. "That was mean," Danny whispered, his hands clutching at Sebastian's shirt. Sebastian chuckled lightly and enveloped him in a reassuring hug. "Forgive me," he murmured against the top of Danny's head. "Yes," Danny breathed out, a small smile peeking through, his voice soft and vulnerable. Eventually, Sebastian pulled back and got out of bed. Danny groaned, not ready to face the day. "Come on, we're going to be late," Sebastian said, changing into fresh clothes. Danny couldn't help but notice the scars scattered across Sebastian's back, a silent testimony to the hardships he'd endured. He quickly dismissed the thought as Sebastian finished dressing and headed for the door. Danny hurried to his own room, changing into his school clothes before joining Sebastian. He noticed Philip sitting at the top of the stairs, peering into the living room. "Philip, what are you?" Danny started, but Philip quickly shushed him, pulling him down behind the railing. "They're talking about something in the newspaper," Philip whispered, nodding toward the living room. Sebastian was sitting on the couch, head in his hands, visibly shaken. His parents sat on either side, trying to comfort him, but their efforts seemed to have little effect. A newspaper lay splayed across the floor, clearly tossed in frustration. Danny caught snippets of conversation. Sebastian was arguing that he should still go to school, while his parents insisted he stay home. Danny realized it was time for them to make themselves known. He grabbed Philip's hand and led him down the stairs. At the bottom, all eyes turned toward them. Sebastian rose quietly, retrieved his school bag, and followed, his expression blank, distant. "Let's go," Sebastian said, his voice flat. Danny nodded and guided Philip forward. The drive to school was silent, tension thick in the air. Danny hoped Sebastian wouldn't try to face the day alone or fall back into the walls he had built over the past months. At school, the newspaper article had already caused a stir. Danny caught fragments of conversations. Someone set free after a kidnapping case, a danger looming again, and quickly pieced it together. Sebastian's sudden change in mood now made sense. Danny walked with Sebastian to his locker, searching for Jenna to help, but she wasn't there. Sebastian kept rubbing at his wrist, and Danny noticed the bandages loosening. He opened his mouth to speak, but the bell rang, signaling the start of class. "I'll see you at lunch," Sebastian muttered, avoiding eye contact, and walked off toward his first class. Classes dragged on endlessly for Danny, each minute stretching longer than the last. When lunch finally arrived, he ran to meet Sebastian at his locker. When Sebastian arrived, he looked worse than he had that morning, paler, with dark circles under his eyes, and bandages slipping from his wrist. "Did you maybe want to eat somewhere quieter today?" Danny asked gently, trying to sound confident. For the first time that day, Sebastian's expression shifted, even if only slightly. "I guess we could, where?" he asked, still avoiding direct eye contact. "Somewhere away from the crowds," Danny suggested, gesturing vaguely. "Follow me. It's not far." Danny led Sebastian to a less frequented part of the school, a quiet hallway and storage area that had been converted from an old classroom. He sat down first, leaning against the wall, and patted the space next to him. Sebastian hesitated, then slowly sat beside him. Danny offered him a snack, but Sebastian didn't take it, instead fidgeting with it in his hands. "How are you holding up?" Danny asked softly. Sebastian shrugged, hands shaking slightly. "Please don't shut me out." Danny reached out to touch his knee, and Sebastian flinched, retreating inward. Danny moved closer, kneeling in front of him. "Sebastian, it's okay to not be okay," Danny whispered, letting his words hang in the quiet space between them. Sebastian's defenses crumbled, tears spilling down as he trembled, unable to contain the emotions he had held for so long. "They let him go, after everything, and now he could try to find me again," Sebastian said through shaky breaths. I can't live in fear forever, and I don't want anyone else to get hurt either." Danny didn't hesitate. He moved closer and wrapped Sebastian in a tight, reassuring hug. Sebastian buried his face into Danny's chest, releasing the tension and sorrow he had held onto for years. Even as the bell rang, neither of them moved, finding comfort in each other's presence as the rest of the school day carried on around them. Chapter 56. Philip seemed to be in a better mood by the time Danny and Sebastian came to pick him up. Sebastian himself was calmer after having eaten something during the day, and Danny had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, resting his head against the window. Sebastian playfully shushed Philip as he got into the car, gesturing toward Danny. Philip giggled quietly in the back seat and nodded, closing the door as softly as he could. When they arrived back home, Philip was the first to get out, but just as he was about to close the door, Sebastian called him back. "Yes, Sebi?" Philip asked in a mock whisper, which wasn't really a whisper at all. "Sorry for being cranky earlier. I just got some upsetting news today," Sebastian said vaguely, careful not to burden Philip with details too heavy for his age. "That's okay. Big Brother said you were having a hard day." "I hope you feel better soon," Philip replied, smiling before waltzing up to the front door. Sebastian chuckled quietly as Philip waved from the doorway. Turning back to Danny, Sebastian gently shook his shoulder. "Danny, we're home." Danny stirred, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Did I fall asleep?" "Just a little," Sebastian said, brushing hair from Danny's face. Danny made a small contented noise before quickly covering his mouth, his face turning bright red. Sorry, Danny mumbled, staring down at his clasped hands. Sebastian smiled softly. It's fine, he said. Actually, kind of cute, he added, lightly brushing his fingers against Danny's cheek before pulling back. Let's get inside before my parents start wondering what we're doing out here. Sebastian got out of the car first and waited by the door. Danny stepped out, looking sheepish. Sebastian smiled down at him, forgetting for a moment about the worries waiting on the other side of the door. But as soon as they stepped inside, the weight of expectation returned, and Sebastian immediately hesitated. Danny noticed the shift, glancing around to see Sebastian's parents sitting on the couch in their work clothes. He tried not to feel annoyed. They had opened their home to him and Philip, but he could see how uncomfortable they made Sebastian. Sebastian dear, may we speak with you for a moment? His mother asked, her smile polite but clinical, like a therapist's. Danny whispered, brushing his hand against Sebastian's as he rose. I'll see you upstairs, he murmured, heading toward Sebastian's room, which now felt mostly Philip's. Philip was coloring quietly on the bed, surrounded by pencils. Danny smiled and grabbed a book from the shelf, heading back to Sebastian's room. Laying down on the bed, Danny began reading. He looked up in surprise when Sebastian entered just after he'd read only 20 pages. Sebastian closed the door behind him, leaning back with a heavy sigh. Danny's thoughts clicked. Your parents, they don't know about what really happened while you were gone, do they? Or about how you coped? Sebastian shook his head, eyes glassy. They don't really see me as their son when it comes to feelings. They treat me like any other patient. I want my parents to be my parents, he admitted, sliding down to sit on the floor. They sent me to hospitals and psychologists before, but all the questions and treatments just made me feel nothing. I don't want to go through that again. Danny sat up on the bed. Not all psychologists are like that. Philip and I saw a wonderful lady who helped us cope with losing our brother. Maybe you just haven't met the right one yet. For now, though, it's just you and me talking, okay? He patted the space next to him. Sebastian hesitated, then slowly pulled himself off the floor and onto the bed, leaving a small gap between them. Danny nudged closer so their knees touched but didn't push further. Look, Danny said, rubbing the back of his neck, I don't think we need to do those exercises anymore. I have another idea. Sebastian looked curious, a small light returning to his eyes. I know it's hard for you to touch people sometimes, Danny began, carefully choosing his words, so I thought of a way you could practice without worry. You'd have my permission and it would be just between us. Sebastian's hands trembled as he interrupted. No, I couldn't possibly, especially not with you. Danny felt a mix of disappointment and pride that Sebastian trusted him enough to say that. All right, Danny said, smiling faintly. He removed his belt and draped it over the bedpost. But if you change your mind, just let me know. I trust you, and I want you to know that you can trust me too. Chapter 57. Are you sure you want to sleep in here tonight? Sebastian asked hesitantly, watching Danny set up a makeshift bed on the floor of his room. Yeah, it'll be fine. Besides, Philip has kind of taken over the bedroom we were sharing, Danny said with a small, mischievous smile, thinking of Philip sprawled out with his coloring supplies. All right, but it does get pretty cool in here at night, Sebastian said as he walked to his closet. Danny watched curiously as Sebastian rifled through his clothes. Ah, here it is. Sebastian pulled out a well-worn dark blue sweater and handed it to Danny. Danny pulled it on over his t-shirt. It was a bit oversized, but cozy and warm. Sorry if it's a bit big, Sebastian said, closing the closet and looking back at Danny. He stared for a moment before covering his mouth and looking away. Danny looked way too cute in the sweater. What? Does it look weird on me? Danny asked, glancing down. Sebastian shook his head. No, not at all, he said with a small smile. He turned off the light and wandered back to his bed. Good night, Danny, Sebastian said, pulling the covers around himself and facing the wall. Good night, Danny whispered, curling under the blankets. But he couldn't help noticing Sebastian's scent lingering in the room, a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone. Danny shifted to get comfortable, finally resting against the soft sweater. Sebastian watched him from the bed. Danny looked peaceful, and for a moment, Sebastian felt a deep, protective affection for him. Quietly, he leaned back and closed his eyes, listening to Danny's slow breathing as he drifted to sleep. Hours later, Danny stirred slightly and adjusted his blanket. He was aware of the space around him, safe and quiet, and smiled softly. Sebastian stirred at the movement and gently reached over, resting a hand on Danny's shoulder. "Everything okay?" Sebastian whispered. Danny nodded sleepily. "Yeah, just comfy, I guess." Sebastian smiled and patted his shoulder gently before settling back down. Danny shifted closer, and Sebastian wrapped an arm around him, both of them finding warmth and comfort in the shared space. The rest of the night passed quietly, filled with the gentle rhythm of two friends, or maybe something a little more, simply being there for each other. By morning, Danny was curled up against Sebastian's side, and Sebastian, surprisingly relaxed, realized that sometimes, comfort was the greatest connection of all. Chapter 58. Sebastian woke to the sound of his alarm buzzing softly on the nightstand. It felt strange. His anxiety usually woke him long before the alarm ever did. For once, he was actually able to sleep until he was supposed to get up, and the rare calm felt almost indulgent. Something shifted against his chest, and he peeked beneath the blankets. Curled up against him was Danny, still asleep, nestled comfortably in his arms. Even though Sebastian felt a little vulnerable, there was a warmth and connection he hadn't experienced since he was a young boy. He held Danny close, not wanting to let the moment of quiet and comfort end. "Morning," Danny murmured groggily, his voice soft against Sebastian's neck. A shiver ran through Sebastian at the sound, and Danny wrapped his arms around his waist, looking up at him with sleepy eyes. "Morning," Sebastian replied, leaning down to brush a gentle kiss across Danny's lips. His stomach twisted nervously, but he had never felt more like he belonged anywhere than he did right then. Danny made a small, contented noise before pulling back slightly. "Do we have to get up?" Danny asked, his legs still tangled with Sebastian's. Sebastian chuckled and pressed a soft kiss to Danny's forehead. "Yeah, we do," he said, though he didn't move to untangle himself. "But we still have a few minutes before we really need to." Danny giggled and nudged his nose against Sebastian's, earning a chuckle and a playful kiss on the nose in return. Their quiet moment was broken by a soft knock at the door. They both sat up quickly. Sebastian grabbed a pair of pajama pants from the floor and made sure Danny was properly dressed before opening the door. "Oh, hey Philip," Sebastian said with a smile as he opened the door. "Nothing, I just wanted to remind Big Brother about my sleepover tonight," Philip said cheerfully, glancing up at Danny who was perched on the edge of the bed. "Oh right. Sebastian, is it okay if I drop him off at his friend's house after school?" Danny asked, glancing at Sebastian with a small, nervous smile. "Yeah, that's fine," Sebastian replied, smiling down at Philip and holding out his hand for a high five. Philip eagerly gave a big high five before skipping out of the room and down the hallway. A few minutes later, all three of them were downstairs, dressed and ready for the day. Philip was finishing breakfast alone at the kitchen table. Danny frowned slightly at the absence of Sebastian's parents, who had been so attentive over the past few days. Sebastian, however, seemed to relax in the quiet. "Let's grab something to eat and then head to school," Sebastian said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Danny's back as he led him to the kitchen. After breakfast, they piled into the car. They dropped Philip off at grade school first, then continued on to the high school. As they approached, Sebastian's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Danny noticed and gently placed his hand over Sebastian's, offering silent reassurance. To their surprise, Jenna was waiting outside the school when they arrived. As they walked toward the entrance, she saw them and started toward them. Sebastian instinctively wrapped a tentative arm around Danny's shoulders, and Jenna slowed as she approached. "Are you feeling a bit better now?" Jenna asked, flipping her hair over her shoulder. There was a hint of hesitation in her voice, likely remembering Sebastian's recent mood swings. "Just a bit," Sebastian murmured, glancing at Danny from the corner of his eye. Jenna's gaze shifted between them, realization dawning on her, and she chuckled at Danny's confused expression. Then she joined them as they walked the rest of the way up to the school. Chapter 59. Sebastian had actually managed to relax a bit at school since the news story had blown over. Most students didn't talk about it anymore. Jenna had almost mentioned it during lunch, but Danny gave her a warning look and gestured for her to drop the subject. Jenna obeyed, even if she didn't quite understand why. Danny was relieved that the school day was otherwise uneventful, and it felt like their lives were slowly returning to a semi-normal rhythm. At the end of the school day, after saying goodbye to Jenna, Danny and Sebastian went to pick up Philip from grade school so they could drop him off at his friend's house for the evening. When they arrived, Philip came running out with his friend in tow. "Uh-oh, looks like Philip brought a friend," Danny said with a chuckle, waving at them. Sebastian leaned around Danny, smiling at the two boys as they approached the car. "Sorry, but Nick's mom got stuck on a phone call. Can Nick come with us?" Philip asked with pleading eyes. Danny rolled down the passenger window and glanced at Sebastian, who gave a playful sigh before nodding. Both boys cheered and hopped into the back seat, chattering away as Danny and Sebastian exchanged amused smiles. When they arrived at Nick's house, the boys ran to the door where Nick's mom, still on the phone, waved and mouthed a thank you. Danny and Sebastian waved back from the car before driving off. Back at the house, it was quiet. Sebastian noticed that no one else was home. His parents must have stayed late at their practice. Danny and Sebastian went to the kitchen for a snack and ate in calm silence, occasionally exchanging playful smiles. Afterward, they moved to the living room to watch TV. Sebastian lay on the couch and gently pulled Danny down next to him. As they flipped through channels, Danny nudged Sebastian with a grin. "I think I'd rather just hang out with you," Danny said softly, resting his head on Sebastian's shoulder. Sebastian smiled, wrapping an arm around him, feeling the warmth of Danny against him. They spent the evening just like that, close, talking quietly and sharing little smiles. Sebastian brushed a strand of hair from Danny's face, and Danny leaned into the touch, feeling safe and cherished. They didn't need words to understand each other. The comfort of being together said more than anything else. Later, as Danny rested against Sebastian, Sebastian whispered, "I'm really glad you're here with me." Danny looked up, eyes shining, and whispered back, "Me too. I love being with you." Sebastian's heart swelled. He leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to Danny's forehead. "I love you too," he said, meaning every word. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. They curled up together on the couch, holding each other close, and drifted off to sleep with smiles on their faces, the quiet bond between them stronger than ever. Chapter 60. The first thing Danny noticed when he woke up the next morning was that his legs and lower back were a little sore. The second thing was that they had skipped dinner the night before, and now he was starving. There should be enough time to eat something before picking up Philip from his friend's house. Danny snuggled closer into Sebastian's chest, reluctant to get out of bed, especially since it was Saturday. Sebastian stirred, stretching his arms and back. "Morning," Danny said, looking up at him and pressing a quick kiss to his chin. Sebastian smiled lazily down at him. "Morning," Sebastian replied, brushing a kiss across Danny's forehead before sitting up. "You hungry?" "Yeah. I guess we missed dinner last night," Danny said, a slight blush creeping onto his cheeks as he thought about the events of the previous evening. "Yeah. I wonder why my parents didn't come get us," Sebastian mused. "Maybe they got home late and went straight to bed," Danny suggested. "Maybe," Sebastian agreed. Both of them got up and got dressed. Danny tried to hide the stiffness in his legs and back as best he could. Sebastian checked his phone and paused, frowning at several messages and missed calls from an unknown number. The text read, "Hey Sebastian, I know it's been a long time, but I really need to talk to you. Sebastian, please call me back ASAP. It's important. Sebastian, this could be serious. Please respond. Sebastian, it's about my father. Please call that I'm really sorry about everything, but I need to talk to you. Is something wrong?" Danny asked, noticing the conflicted look on Sebastian's face. "No, nothing," Sebastian replied, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Just a weird number texting me. Let's get some breakfast first." After they ate, they got into the car. Sebastian noticed his parents' cars were still parked in the driveway, so they must have come home at some point last night and were probably still asleep. They drove to pick up Philip and were stunned to see Nick's house surrounded by police cars, fire trucks, and yellow tape. Danny's heart leapt into his throat, and he noticed Sebastian gripping the steering wheel tightly. As soon as Sebastian parked, Danny ran toward the yellow tape, panic making his legs move faster than he could control. Philip had only been out of sight for a few hours. What could have possibly happened in such a short time? "Sir, please stay back. This is a crime scene," a young officer called out, motioning for Danny to step away. "My brother was here last night." "Where is he?" Danny asked, panic rising. "Please step back," the officer repeated calmly, waiting until Danny complied. "I just need your name and contact info, and we'll reach out when we can." Sebastian watched the scene carefully. One of the ambulances held Nick's mother, who seemed shaken but alive, explaining something about her son. Sebastian froze, memories of past trauma making it hard to move closer. Pulling out his phone, Sebastian stared at the unfamiliar number. Who could it be reaching out after all this time? Then realization hit. He dialed back, waiting anxiously as the call connected. "Oh, thank goodness," said the voice on the other end. "Christian, what's going on?" "I thought you didn't want anything to do with me after you transferred schools," Sebastian said sharply, though his voice betrayed his worry. It had been over 2 years since he had last spoken to his ex-crush, who had once been tied to a traumatic event in his life. "I know, and I'm sorry for leaving you like that. But that's not why I'm calling," Christian said, sounding tired. "I assume you've heard about the mistrial?" "Yes," Sebastian said, swallowing hard. "I wanted to warn you, he's been talking about revenge for the last few days, but disappeared last night." "Looks like he didn't come for you," Christian added, hesitating. "No, he didn't come for me. He went after my boyfriend's brother and his friend, and hurt their mom," Sebastian replied angrily. "It couldn't have been a coincidence." "Has your ex-girlfriend been around your house recently?" Christian asked. "Not exactly, but our families had dinner together this past weekend. She mentioned you a lot, but never about where I was." "You don't think she tipped him off, do you?" Christian asked. Sebastian shook his head, then asked, "Do you know where he could be?" "I'm sorry, I don't," Christian admitted. "I'll keep an ear out though. I'm really sorry about everything." Sebastian hung up and walked over to Danny, who was still speaking with the officer, clearly distressed. "They won't tell me anything about my brother," Danny said near tears. "We can't release info except to parents or guardians," the officer replied. "Well, my parents are his guardians. I can call them down," Sebastian offered. "Have them come to the precinct. We'll take statements if needed," the officer said, closing his notepad. "Okay," Sebastian said gently, guiding Danny away from the scene. He pulled out his phone to call his parents, trying to stay calm for both of them. Chapter 61. As Danny and Sebastian sat at the police station with Sebastian's parents, Danny couldn't keep still. His thoughts were entirely focused on his younger brother. Every second felt unbearable, and he kept fighting the urge to stand up and search on his own, though he had no idea where to begin. With Nick's mother still in the hospital, there was little information to work with. After what felt like hours to Danny, though it had likely only been minutes, they were finally called in to give Philip's description and their statements. Sebastian briefly tried to bring up his fear that someone from his past might be involved, but even his parents gently shut it down, telling him he was letting old trauma get the better of him. Danny had heard Sebastian's concern, but when he saw how quickly it was dismissed, he stayed quiet. Still, a troubling thought lingered in his mind. If Sebastian was right, and someone was trying to get revenge, then Philip and Nick might be in real danger. That thought made Danny's chest tighten. Sebastian, on the other hand, began to withdraw again. He worried Danny might blame him, that his past had resurfaced and put the people Danny loved at risk. But Danny didn't see it that way at all. He believed this was the fault of someone deeply troubled, not Sebastian. After leaving the station, they returned to Sebastian's house. There, Sebastian's mother firmly told them not to mention the incident from their hometown to the police. It would only drag everyone into a media mess, she explained. And the police would want to question Sebastian all over again. She added that, as far as anyone knew, the man Sebastian feared was still under legal restrictions following the mistrial. Her reasoning made sense, but it didn't ease Sebastian's growing dread. Throughout the evening, Sebastian received occasional update messages from Christian whenever he heard anything new. Danny noticed, and though he tried to hide it, a flicker of jealousy crept in. Still, his worry for Philip outweighed everything else. Sebastian noticed the look and made a quiet effort to reassure Danny. Small touches, gentle words, reminders that Danny was the one he trusted. Sebastian's parents spent most of the night on the phone, reaching out to friends and colleagues for help. Meanwhile, Danny and Sebastian stayed in Sebastian's room, trying and failing to distract themselves. Nothing could pull their minds away from Philip and Nick. 2 days passed with no solid leads. The police had little to share, and Christian had no new information either. Danny's hope began to fade. "We can't give up," Sebastian said softly as they sat with Jenna in the cafeteria. "I was missing for months before I was found." The moment the words left his mouth, he froze. "Missing?" Jenna whispered loudly, eyes wide. "You were kidnapped?" Sebastian hesitated, then nodded. "Please, not right now. We'll talk about it after Philip is found." Still shaken, Jenna agreed, though she insisted Sebastian would have to answer her questions later. Reluctantly, he promised, and the conversation ended there. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Neither Danny nor Sebastian could focus. Even the drive home was quiet, heavy with unspoken fear. Sebastian wondered if this was how his parents had felt when he disappeared, days of uncertainty stretching endlessly. The thought made his stomach churn. That evening, they sat in Sebastian's room. Danny pretended to read while Sebastian half-heartedly worked on homework. Then Sebastian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it casually, until he saw the unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be Christian, he opened the message. The moment he read it, his face drained of color, and he flung the phone across the room. "Sebastian?" Danny asked quickly, alarmed by the sudden sound. Sebastian didn't answer. He wrapped his arms around himself, staring at the phone like it might explode. Danny slowly stood, heart pounding, and picked it up. The screen was still on. He read the message. His hands began to shake, and the phone slipped from his grip. The message contained a blurred, unsettling photo, enough to suggest danger without showing details. Beneath it was a single line of text. "Meet me at the old coal mines outside town tomorrow at 7 p.m. Tell no one. The boy's safety depends on it." The room fell into silence, heavy, terrifying, and full of what came next. Chapter 62. Neither Danny nor Sebastian knew whose finger had appeared in the photo, and neither of them wanted to imagine it. But Sebastian had no idea where this coal mine the message mentioned could be. Their town was fairly built up, with barely any farmland around. Where would they even begin to look? And with a 7 p.m. deadline looming tomorrow, Sebastian knew he had to figure out a way to get there without anyone noticing. He was terrified, but he also knew he had no choice if he wanted to protect the young boys. Danny and Sebastian sat frozen on the floor of Sebastian's bedroom, both unsure what to do next. Sebastian couldn't tell his parents or the police, not yet, not without risking the boy's safety. The thought of either boy being harmed was enough to make Sebastian hate himself before anything even happened. Danny was the first to pull himself together. He picked up Sebastian's phone and reread the message, hoping for any clue about who had sent it or where the location might be. He needed to figure it out, not just for Sebastian but to save the boys. Still, the threat that the sender had made kept him from calling anyone for help. He had to understand the situation first, to make sure they could act carefully. Danny thought through the area. There were no actual coal mines nearby. The only place that might match the photo was an abandoned lumber mill a short drive from town. It had been closed long before Danny was born, and though it had once been intended for a new housing development, construction had stopped when the developers couldn't secure permits. Equipment had been left behind, some of it rusting, and a large pit had formed near the main building. Water collected in it, creating a foggy, eerie look, something that could easily be mistaken for a mine. This had to be the place. Sebastian slowly recovered from his shock. Shaking, he got to his feet and gently took the phone from Danny. "You don't happen to know where this place is, do you?" Sebastian asked, his face pale, fear etched into every line. Danny looked at him for a moment, unsure if Sebastian was serious. But the expression on Sebastian's face left no doubt. He intended to go, and he seemed to expect he might not come back. That thought alone made Danny's heart race. He couldn't let Sebastian face this alone, and the police would take too long to respond. What he's talking about, it's not a mine, Danny said quietly, trying not to let his fear take over. It's an abandoned lumber mill, about 45 minutes from here. Part of it's flooded, there's a big hole in front of the main building, and old equipment scattered around. I've been there a couple of times before. I can show you the way. No, you don't need to get involved, Sebastian said quickly, fear in his voice. I can handle it, I don't want anything to happen to you. Sebastian! Danny exclaimed, his voice rising, then softening as he swallowed hard. I'm already involved, whether you like it or not. And I'm not letting you go alone. I can't lose you, or Philip. I'm coming with you. We're going to do this together. Sebastian dropped to his knees, wrapping himself tightly around Danny. His body shook, and Danny could feel how much fear and worry Sebastian was holding inside. Tears began to spill down Sebastian's cheeks as he buried his face in Danny's shoulder. I'm so sorry, Danny. I'm so sorry, Sebastian whispered, his voice breaking. Danny held him close, letting his own tears fall. It's okay, he murmured. We'll get through this. Together. They stayed like that for a moment, holding each other, drawing strength from their closeness. They knew what they had to do next, and they also knew that fear could not stop them, not when lives were at stake. Chapter 63. Danny and Sebastian slept in Sebastian's bedroom that night, but neither of them got much rest. Danny had insisted on sharing the bed, partly because he feared nightmares, but mostly because he worried Sebastian might leave him behind. They held each other through the night, thoughts consumed by the plan for the evening ahead. Sebastian worried about facing his tormentor after so long, wondering if he would even be able to act without freezing in fear. Danny, on the other hand, focused on logistics, how they could safely get Philip and Nick back, and whether they could leave some kind of signal or message in case someone needed to find them. As the hours crept by, Danny thought carefully about a possible solution. The threat had been aimed at Sebastian, warning him not to involve anyone else, but Danny wondered if there was a way to leave information that could quietly reach someone who could help, without alerting the sender. He imagined a printed copy of the text, something believable enough that if someone found it, they would immediately contact the authorities. Danny spent the rest of the night planning quietly in his mind, thinking through how to connect Sebastian's phone to a printer, what supplies they might need, and how to get everything done without drawing attention. His thoughts kept him restless until exhaustion finally claimed him. The next morning, Danny awoke to find Sebastian already awake, staring at his phone. Leaning his head against Sebastian's shoulder, Danny asked groggily, "Did something come up?" Sebastian's eyes glistened with tears as he looked at the screen. "Hey, don't do this to yourself," Danny said softly, concern lacing his voice. Taking Sebastian's phone gently, Danny placed it on the bed and straddled him. "I'm worried about them too," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Philip, he's the only family I have left, and I promised I'd protect him. You're not the only one feeling guilty. But now we just need to find them and bring them home safely. After that, you can teach Philip that cookie recipe you promised him, okay?" Sebastian nodded, leaning in for a quick kiss before signaling for Danny to step aside. He got up to take a quick shower, and Danny turned his attention to the task at hand. He quietly grabbed Sebastian's phone, USB cable and laptop from the desk, trying to move as silently as possible. The laptop was password protected. Danny groaned, trying to recall what they had used for their last project. With a shrug, he typed in a guess, password, and to his relief, it worked. He quickly accessed the phone's files, took a screenshot of the text message, and transferred the photo to the laptop. Then he deleted the photo from Sebastian's phone to avoid leaving any trace. Danny checked the printer, ensuring it was ready. When the shower stopped, he heard Sebastian brushing his teeth and knew he had only a short window. He quickly wrote a note on the printed message. "We found them at the old lumber mill. He threatened Philip and Nick if we told anyone. We went to rescue them at 7 p.m. Time ran out just as Sebastian approached the door. Danny folded the paper and tucked it behind his back, hiding it as Sebastian entered. Sebastian stepped out wearing only a towel, and Danny couldn't help but smile at him, still catching his breath. Sebastian gave a small, tired smile in return before heading to his closet to change into practical clothes for the day, gear suitable for navigating muddy, unstable ground. Danny quietly left the room to change into his own outfit. For a moment, he placed the folded note on the pillow, then slipped it into his back pocket. He planned to leave it on Sebastian's bed at the last possible moment, just in case it was needed. Chapter 64. As the time to leave drew closer, Sebastian ran through the excuse they would use to leave the house. It sounded believable enough. They were supposedly going to see a movie, a way to distract themselves from the anxiety of thinking about Philip and Nick. Sebastian hoped his parents would buy it, though he felt a pang of guilt for lying. He couldn't risk doing anything that might endanger the boys further. Danny slid a small pocket knife into the outside of his right hiking boot, then smoothed his pant leg over it to hide the bump. Sebastian considered bringing a weapon too, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He knew his nerves would make handling one dangerous, and he feared making the situation worse. Part of him felt reassured that Danny had a means of protection, even if Sebastian himself wasn't armed. When it was finally time to leave, Sebastian decided to leave his phone at the house to avoid raising suspicion. He made his bed neatly and placed the phone on top of the sheets before heading out, but he paused when he noticed Danny wasn't following him. "I'll be out in a second. I just need to use the bathroom," Danny called from the hall. Sebastian nodded and continued downstairs. As soon as he was out of sight, Danny pulled the folded note from his back pocket and laid it on the bed. He used Sebastian's phone to hold one end down and his own phone to flatten the other. Standing in the doorway, he glanced back at the note, taking a deep breath as the reality of what they were about to do hit him. Then, steeling himself, he joined Sebastian downstairs. Sebastian was talking with his parents in the living room, likely laying out their movie story. Danny knew they were probably walking into danger, but he couldn't see another option. "I suppose it's good for you boys to get some time away from all this craziness, but try to be back by 10, Sebastian's mother said, glancing up from her computer. "We'll need you both bright and early tomorrow for the search parties." "Alright, thanks, Mom," Sebastian replied, planting a quick kiss on her cheek before doing the same with his father. He left the living room with Danny close behind. They got into the car and sat silently for a moment, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. Sebastian took a shaky breath, put the car in reverse, and backed out of the driveway. Danny gave quiet directions to the abandoned lumber mill, both of them trying to mentally prepare for whatever they might find. The closer they got, the quieter Danny became, lost in thought. In the back of Sebastian's mind, he knew there was a slim chance it wasn't Mr. Roberts, but the coincidences made it hard to believe otherwise. He knew firsthand how dangerous and unpredictable Mr. Roberts could be. They finally pulled up at the edge of the gravel lane leading to the old lumber mill. Bent poles, the remains of a once solid fence, jutted out of the ground at odd angles. The road was full of potholes and puddles. Thick fog clung to the landscape, and the abandoned equipment around them looked like shadowy figures looming in the mist. As they walked the rocky lane, the terrain grew rougher. Deep ditches cut across the path, partially filled with water, threatening to twist an ankle if they weren't careful. Finally, they reached the main lumber mill building. The roof was partially torn down, with the scoop of an excavator dangling on top like a silent reminder of the building's decay. Sebastian and Danny exchanged a tense glance, swallowing hard. Then, gathering their courage, Sebastian stepped into the doorway first, Danny following closely behind. Chapter 65. The inside of the lumber mill looked no better than the outside. A massive saw dominated the center of the room, while long, rusted hand saws hung crookedly along the walls or lay scattered across the floor. Broken lumber, shattered glass, and debris from the collapsed ceiling littered the ground, forcing Danny and Sebastian to move carefully with every step. Sebastian had to duck often to avoid low-hanging beams and fallen supports. The deeper they went, the heavier the air felt. Now that they were inside, neither of them was sure what they were supposed to do. Were they meant to search room by room and hope they found the boys before something went wrong? The idea made both of them uneasy. "Where do you think he'd keep Philip and Nick?" Danny whispered, keeping his voice low. "I don't know," Sebastian replied quietly. When I was here before, I was kept below ground. He might do the same thing again. He hesitated. Does this place even have something like that? Kind of, Danny said, stepping ahead and carefully leading the way toward the section of the building where the roof had collapsed. He gestured for Sebastian to slow down. Watch your footing. The floor here is weak from all the moisture. Danny pointed toward a large opening in the floor, partially hidden beneath broken beams. The boards around it sagged ominously, as if they had given way more than once before. As Sebastian moved closer, the wood creaked beneath his weight. Danny quickly motioned for him to stop. It won't hold you, Danny whispered. I'll check. Danny lowered himself to the floor and carefully slid toward the opening. Peering into the darkness below, he listened closely. For a moment, all he heard was dripping water, then something else. A faint sound. Hello. Danny called softly, leaning closer and wishing he'd remembered to bring a flashlight. Brother, came a weak, trembling voice from below. Philip. Danny breathed, relief washing over him. Is Nick with you? He's here, Philip answered. He's asleep. I think he's just really cold. There's water down here. Philip's voice wavered. Can we go home now? With Sebi? Yes, Danny said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. We're getting you out. I promise. Danny pulled back from the opening and turned toward Sebastian. Tears were already streaming down Sebastian's face, and Danny knew his own weren't far behind. But before either of them could move, something shifted behind Sebastian. Sebastian, look out! Danny shouted. A loud crack echoed through the building. Sebastian spun around just in time to see Mr. Roberts standing there. He froze for a moment before collapsing backward, clutching his side in shock. Mr. Roberts sneered, his expression cold and familiar. I didn't expect you to come back, he said flatly. But you were always predictable. Danny's heart pounded as fear and anger surged through him. Memories of past pain flashed through his mind, but he refused to let them take control. He wasn't going to lose Sebastian. Not today. Mr. Roberts stepped closer, his presence threatening. When Sebastian tried to grab at him to slow him down, Mr. Roberts kicked him away without hesitation. Sebastian cried out and curled in on himself, barely conscious. Using the moment, Danny darted behind the large saw in the center of the room, pressing himself against it as another loud crack rang out. Metal sparked above his head, and he ducked instinctively. There's no way you're leaving here, Mr. Roberts called out. Come out now or I make this worse. Danny covered his mouth, tears slipping through his fingers. He thought of the note. Of Sebastian's parents. Please be close. Please hurry. Creeping along the edge of the saw, Danny reached a support beam behind Mr. Roberts. He peeked out, watching the man's back as sirens suddenly pierced the night outside. Voices shouted. Footsteps thundered closer. Danny stood tall, his fear giving way to fierce relief. It's over, he said quietly but firmly. Mr. Roberts spun around in fury, raising his weapon, but before he could act, the building filled with noise and light. Officers rushed in, shouting commands. A final loud impact sent Danny stumbling backward. As his vision blurred, Danny forced himself to speak. There are kids, under the floor. Then everything went dark. Chapter 66. Danny woke to bright lights and the familiar sterile smell of a hospital. He felt sore, itchy, and uncomfortable, lying in a bed separated from another patient by a white curtain. As his eyes adjusted, he saw Sebastian's parents and Philip sitting at the end of the bed. Relief flooded through him, and a few happy tears slipped down his cheeks. His left arm was in a sling, wrapped around his shoulder. What about Sebastian and Nick? Big brother! Philip exclaimed, rushing to Danny's bedside, tears already welling up. Hey, why are you crying? Danny asked, forcing a smile despite the knot of worry still in his chest. He wasn't sure how Sebastian's parents would react to everything that had happened, or whether they would blame him or Philip. He hoped the note he had left might help. I thought you were going to leave me alone. Philip cried, clutching Danny's hand. I didn't want you to go. No way, Danny said with a playful grin, giving Philip's hand a gentle squeeze. I promised you I wouldn't leave, didn't I? Philip nodded, hugging Danny's arm tightly. That's when Danny noticed Philip's missing pointer finger on his right hand. His gaze flicked to Sebastian's parents, who were moving around but didn't look angry at all. Instead, their expressions were filled with relief and pride. Sebastian's mother approached with a warm smile, ruffling Danny's hair. "Is Sebastian okay? And Nick?" Danny asked, hoping for good news. "Nick had hypothermia and a few broken bones," Sebastian's mother said, gently holding Philip. "He's stable now, thanks to Philip keeping him warm until help arrived. Sebastian, well, you can see for yourself." Sebastian's father pulled back the curtain, revealing Sebastian lying in the bed next to Danny. Danny's heart lifted seeing that Sebastian could move on his own. He had stitches on his face, a leg in a cast, and bandages around his waist, but he was awake and alert. "We pulled a few strings to get you two in the same room," Sebastian's mother said with a wink. "What you did was reckless, but you saved Philip and Nick, and you told us where you were." "But I didn't leave a note," Sebastian said, looking confused between his parents. All eyes turned to Danny. He blushed but explained softly, "I printed a screenshot of Sebastian's text message and left it on the bed with a note underneath." He fiddled with the edges of the hospital blanket nervously. Sebastian's mother chuckled and gave Danny a gentle hug that avoided his injured shoulder. Danny glanced at Sebastian and was met with a look full of respect and affection, enough to make him blush and tear up. "There's someone who wants to thank you too," Sebastian's mother said, heading to the door and returning with Nick's mother. She looked tearful and relieved, hugging Danny before gently embracing Sebastian. Bruises and stitches were visible on her, and she still walked with a slight limp, but she looked far better than Danny had feared. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You helped save my little boy. I just had to come and say that before I returned to his room." After she left, Sebastian's parents explained the legal side of things. There would be no charges against anyone, as long as they all attended counseling. Sebastian cringed at the thought, but Danny offered him a reassuring smile. Mr. Roberts had been shot and killed at the scene, likely right after he attacked them. The police might stop by later, but it would only be to tie up loose ends. By the time Philip and Sebastian's parents left, it was dark outside. Danny wasn't even sure how long he had been unconscious. That night, he and Sebastian talked quietly, processing everything that had happened, until exhaustion finally pulled them both to sleep, facing each other, comforted by the knowledge that everyone they cared about was finally safe. Chapter 67. 1 month later, Sebastian was finally starting to get used to the crutches the doctors had given him after his hospital stay. He had to hunch over a bit more than he liked because of his height, but he was learning to work with it. Carefully, he hobbled down the stairs, picking up a little speed once he reached the main floor. Using his crutches and balancing on one foot, he made his way to the kitchen, where he knew Danny and Philip were waiting. Sebastian was determined to keep his promise to Philip, to teach him how to make his family's famous marble chip cookies. "Hey, what took you so long, slowpoke?" Danny teased as he saw Sebastian hobble into the kitchen with a crutch under each arm. He walked over and waited for Sebastian to lean down a little so he could plant a quick, playful kiss on his lips. "Do you know how hard it is to go down the stairs on crutches?" Sebastian said, giving Danny a gentle poke with the end of one crutch. Danny laughed and playfully swatted him away before turning back to Philip, who was perched on a step stool at the counter with a mix of baking ingredients spread out. From his seat at the island, Sebastian guided both Danny and Philip through the baking process. Laughter filled the kitchen when Danny accidentally turned the mixer too high and ended up with a face full of flour. Once the cookies were in the oven, the three of them settled into the living room to wait. Philip took the single chair, while Danny and Sebastian made themselves comfortable on the couch. At first, Danny planned to sit on the far end so he wouldn't crowd Sebastian, who was still recovering from his injuries. But Sebastian had other plans. "Come closer," Sebastian whispered, pulling Danny toward him until Danny's back rested against Sebastian's chest. "Aren't you still sore?" Danny asked softly, leaning back hesitantly. "A bit," Sebastian admitted, "but I'm not about to miss a chance to hold you close." He wrapped his arms gently around Danny's waist, careful not to put any strain on Danny's shoulder. Danny rested his free hand over Sebastian's, And together they settled into the couch, content to wait for the timer to signal that their cookies were ready. Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.